While I wait for the coats of clear gloss on the main cabinet to cure, I can move on to this panel. So this is where somebody cobbled together some slide switches. I want to patch in these holes. And this rectangle was cut out to allow room for the old turntable platter to spin. So I want to block that out too. And then I'll put some new veneer on it. So what I think I'll do is use that same filler I used to patch in the big hole that had been down there. At least for these small holes. For this, I think I'll cut out a bit of wood and glue that in, and then fill in any remaining voids with the filler. And I'll sand down most of the old veneer and cut out some new strips. This rounded bit is supposed to be here, so this fits in like so. And I believe this was to allow you to service the radio, because otherwise it's pretty hard to get it at the tubes. You have to flip the radio upside down. So there are 4 screws, one in each corner, and you take those out and then you can get this down, and the radio chassis sits right in here, so you can pull out the tubes and replace them and whatnot. And this up here I believe was for ventilation. I'm not sure if it just looked like that or if there was any kind of grill cloth or not. I haven't been able to find any good pictures online. But I believe this is the original old dark brown paint up here. So it is possible it was just like this. That's not exactly visible when you observe the radio normally. The only way you'd ever see that is if you crawled underneath and looked up under the radio. So it's possible it might have just been like that. At any rate, first things first, I gotta patch in these holes. I cleaned up the back of the panel and then glued on a couple thin pieces of veneer, I think it's ash, just to block up those holes so that I can fill them in using the high performance wood filler. The same stuff I used to plug up the hole where the old phonograph had been. That'll work fine on these. For this larger hole, I'm going to fill in this a bit with some scrap wood. Like take a piece something like this and cut it down a bit to fill up most of the hole, and then I'll fill in all the voids with this stuff. Then I'll sand down the old finish and most of the old veneer until I get this nice flat. Then I'll glue on some new veneer. I looked through my stock and I just don't have any flat cuts, so I'll go with this quarter cut stuff. Same stuff I used to repair that shelf. Take out a section like in here. Get the seam running about the same place as it did on the original. I finished patching the holes in the panel and then sanded it down nice and smooth. I then selected 2 sections of veneer to go over this. And this time, to attach the veneer, I thought I'd use a trick I've used a few times before, which is to take some wood glue and dilute it a bit, spread it on nice and thin, and let it dry, and then actually put on a second coat. That's what I'm waiting for to dry right now. Now the veneer will curl up quite badly, because this is not paper-backed veneer, it's just thin wood, so when it gets damp it curls up, but as you'll see, as this dries out, it'll flatten right back down. Also, when the glue dries, it's quite clear, so this actually has a couple coats of glue on it right now. So the idea is once the glue sets up nice and dry, I'll flip these over, set them up just the way I want them to be, and then heat this up, either with a heat gun or an iron, and it will reactivate the glue and kind of melt it together. And I'll then use a J roller to make sure it's adhered really well, and that should hold it down. Alright, it's been a few hours and the glue has dried up, and as I hoped, the wood flattened out. So I'm going to put it on something like this. The original seam is right down in there, so put this about like that, and that about like that. and I'll heat it up with a heat gun and use a J roller to stick it down. I'll do one side at a time, so guess I'll do the larger section first. So I'll get this stuck down really good and flat, and then I'll butt this up tight to it and heat it up and stick it down. I put a little tape down to hold a piece of veneer in place while I work on it. I'm going to use a heat gun to heat it up, and I got a J roller to roll it down. More traditionally you would use an iron, but I think this is quicker and faster. Just got to be careful that you don't make it too hot, man, scorch the wood. And I don't want to heat up the blue painter's tape really, otherwise it could be very hard to get off. So I'm just going to glue down this side, then I'll pull off the blue painter's tape. You see how it's separated there? A little heat going on that. And that's really about all there is to it. Make sure you get a lot of pressure on it with the J roller. I've got the one side stuck down pretty good. Now when it comes to trimming off the excess, to get off the excess going against the grain, you can kind of do it like cutting glass, scoring it with a sharp blade, and then snap it off. And for the stuff going with the grain, just carefully cut along. Now I need to get a bit closer than that, but I'll do that a little bit more control. I'll get out a straight edge and an even sharper brand new blade and carefully score it. But before I do that, I'm going to glue the other side on. So let's see, I think I want it right about like that. So again, I'll tape this up tight and then heat up the outside edge and then work my way in. Traditionally, there's something called veneer tape you can use. It's a strip of tape. You'd run along here, and then you'd actually push pins into it to pull this through. Actually, sorry, you'd use the push pins first to push these two pieces of veneer together really tight, then you'd lay a strip of tape on it. And that tape is specially formulated so that it doesn't stick to the wood too tight. Otherwise, when I've used this blue painter's tape and gotten it hot and gone over with the J roller, when I've peeled it off, it actually ripped up some of the wood grain. So don't want to do that for sure. Alright, so heat up the outside edge, and here's where that curve is cut out, which is going to be interesting to trim the excess veneer off of. We'll see how that goes. first I just want to heat up from about here. You know, just shy of this blue tape. I'm going to peel a little bit off. There we go. You can hear it when you get it hot enough to glue. You can actually hear it when you roll over it, that kind of tacky, sticky sound. Now if you're thinking that, hey, if this ever gets hot in the future, won't the veneer separate? Well, this heat gun is, probably well over 500 degrees Fahrenheit, so if it's getting hot enough for your veneer to separate, I'd say you got other problems. I got the new veneer glued down nice and tight all around, and then I carefully chipped away at all the excess. I'm pretty much just using a utility knife. That's what all these little chips of wood are. And then I sanded it. So it's nice and smooth around all the sides. So let's see if it fits. There we go. So it'll sit in there just like that. Now I need to grain fill it and spray it with toner lacquer and all the rest of it to make it match the rest of the cabinet. I'm using the same Constantine paste walnut wood filler that I used in the rest of the cabinet. Diluted it a bit with some mineral spirits, and now I'm just smearing it on, and then I'll wipe off the excess when it gets tacky with some burlap. Alright, that turned out well. Now I have to wait 24 hours for it to completely dry before I can move on. In the meantime, I can work a bit more on the main cabinet. It's been long enough now I can start sanding down the first few coats of gloss I put on here. Not too much orange peel. It's been going pretty well so far. I think I'll use a little bit of 400, maybe 600. And give this whole cabinet a light sanding and then spray on 3 more light coats of clear gloss. I'm preparing the cabinet for a few final coats of lacquer. I've sanded it down nice and smooth with 400 grit sandpaper, and now I'm cleaning off any residue with a terry cloth and some odorless mineral spirits. I've got it propped up on a box so I can get all around all the sides. And I'm doing this up in the attic because I've got this convenient exhaust fan and there's nothing around that's going to be hurt by the lacquer. Although really, lacquer does not travel very far. Especially on a really hot day, this stuff will be dry before it even hits the ground. That's why when you spray it, you actually need to be fairly close. 6 to 12 inches they recommend. Unlike enamel, which will carry the pigments and travel quite far, you don't have to worry too much about this. Like out before when I was spraying the toner lacquer, I just put down a green tarp that was like 10 by 10, and that was plenty of protection. Remember, these deft cans have an adjustable nozzle. and they have fan spray. So I always do a little test spray to make sure you know how it's oriented. So I have the spray in a horizontal plane, which is exactly what I want. I'm going to spray from the bottom going up, and the very last spraying I'll do is on the top surfaces, try to minimize the overspray. In other words, when I spray from the bottom up, it's going to be overspray on the top surfaces, but then when I spray the top surfaces later, it should melt that down, and it hopefully won't be quite so much sanding I'll have to do after the fact. Kind of an awkward thing to spray, like with the shelf that comes out. Just do the best I can. Okay, I'll let that dry for about 20 minutes and then give it another coat. Here's the cabinet partially reassembled after the lacquer cured. And here's how that access panel turned out with the toner lacquer. These are the original screws that held it on. I only had one of the original washers and it was kind of black. And I went with brass washers. I don't know if the original was a brass washer that had tarnished over time, or if it was some type of anodizing technique, but I figured this was a nicer look than using, say, stainless steel or using plated washers. I also painted the edges of that panel with that very dark brown, just like I used elsewhere all around, including the speaker area. Finished going over all of this stuff. Speaking of brass, here's the original bezel. I have not cleaned it. I kind of do like this old patinaed look. It's a little bit jarring compared to the refinished cabinet, so I'm not really sure what I want to do with that. I figure it's best just to leave it alone. As for the speaker grill, some of you may or may not know, the reproduction grill cloth suppliers have pretty much dried up. I'm not sure where the stuff was being made, but I guess they don't make it anymore. So once the word got out there was a run at places like Antique Electronics Supply and Radio Days and so on, and this was one of the first to go because it's very common for all the Philcos of the late 30s. Luckily I ordered this before the supplier dried up, but now I'm not so sure what I want to do with it because I can't order any more of this. And the original's not that bad compared to having none at all. It's got a hole here and it's separated a bit down here, and there's some kind of weird discoloration on this side. Maybe it got damp or something. But for the time being, I'm going to stick with this and just hang on to this. I never know when I might get another more valuable radio or so that doesn't have any grill cloth at all, then I might want to use this. Or, of course, I could always throw it on eBay, which I guess has been happening, and it's selling, not surprisingly, for more than it did originally. Alright, so that's the cabinet. I still have not rubbed it out yet, but I can do that anytime. Here is the chassis. So this gets mounted so that this faces straight up. I'm not entirely sure how it mounts. I did find some photos online and they don't quite look like what I've got. There's one bracket out here with a hole, and I think that when I got this, that's the only bolt that was holding this in, which goes in up there. But there should be some kind of mounting that goes in here and on the other side, which would correspond to the back of the chassis, like here and here. But this faces straight up, so these would be pointing straight down, and those mounting things would be at a right angle to the chassis. So I don't know what kind of mounts went in around here. It must have been some kind of right angle bracket mounting system. I could see some traces of rubber here. I'm sure it was some kind of cushion mount. So if anybody has any idea of how this chassis was mounted at a right angle to those brackets, I'd be very interested in knowing. Otherwise, I've just got that one bolt, which is not going to hold it in there very securely at all. Otherwise, chassis, it's been hacked up a little bit. So remember, this had a phonograph hacked into it. So that's what some of these wires are about. One was power to the phonograph motor. One was input from the phonograph cartridge. I'm going to take all that stuff out and bring this thing back to stock as much as possible. Some crappy electrical tape here on this grid cap. I'll clean that up. Tuning mechanism seems to be fine. Everything seems to rotate pretty freely. On the underside, it's had some repairs done. Some caps have been replaced. Looks like some wires spliced in, but nothing too horrible. Oh, and the volume control. Well, it should have a shaft this long to protrude to the top of the cabinet, but this is what I got. Since then, though, I did get a Philco 38.4 parts set, and I salvaged the control out of that, and I think it will be a fine substitute, and it has a shaft that's full length. One other modification I'm not too crazy about is these tube bases. The shields are on the bottom. Well, they're mangled. I believe somebody did that so they could use metal tubes. But what was in here originally were glass type, like this. So they are octal tubes, but they have the old ST shape, and these have smaller diameter bases than the metal tubes. So the purpose of these shields when you use this type is it provides a ground shield around all these sensitive signals coming in here. But metal tubes, the whole shield, the whole outside is a shield, so it doesn't need that extra base protection. Well, it just so happens that a while ago I bought some tube shields and sockets and miscellaneous Philco bits, including 3 unmangled tube shields. So I would like to put these on this chassis and use all of these original glass type tubes. Well, these are held in by hollow brass rivets. Easy enough, it seems to me, to drill from the top and get these rivets out, and these will come right out. And then to put these on, simple way would be to use a small nut and bolt, no problem. Although it won't look quite original. However, there is one wire on this guy. I believe that's why they use these hollow rivets, is that they would sometimes want to run a wire right through the rivet hole, so when you put the shield over it, the wire is entirely inside. So I've been asking around and looking around, and the best thing I've seen so far are some brass eyelets that are used in leather work that I think would be sturdy enough and long enough to maybe fit through here and have the strength to hold these down. And then I would use maybe a little riveting tool, kind of like a nail set of sorts, and I'd put a metal piece on the other side, like a little anvil, and hammer it down to flatten out the other side of the rivet. But again, hey, if anybody's got any thoughts on how to replace these, let me know. As far as restoring the radio goes, I will save that for a cold wintry day. Right now I want to finish refinishing the last refinishing project for the year before it gets too cold, which is this Admiral TV cabinet. So that is the end of this restoration project. I hope you guys enjoyed these videos.